Okay, welcome to Module 4, Environmental Policy, Laws, and Treaties. Let's see. So the objectives in this module demonstrate an understanding of the history and significance of treaties between Native Americans and the United States government, demonstrate ability to critically analyze current environmental policies and laws, and articulate how environmental policies, law, and treaties impact population health today. I want you to remember that with this module, this particular module could be an entire course. We could take a whole semester looking at these issues and objectives. So in this module, it's really just sort of a very broad overview, and we won't really get in depth into specific policies, treaties, or laws, although I will provide some information in the suggested area, the suggested readings for you, for those of you that want to kind of further explore that now or after the course is done. So let's talk about demonstrate an understanding of the history and significance of treaties between Native Americans and the United States government. The required readings for this that align with this particular objective are the Treaty Trail from Native American Testimony, which is edited by Peter Nabokov. And for this reading, I only selected a few pages to give you an overview, but I will add the full chapter under suggested readings for those of you who want to look over information about some specific treaties. And then the second reading is The Cloaking of Justice by Dr. D.E. Wilkins. So the first reading highlights the Treaty Trail from Native American Testimony, really highlights the problems with treaties. So certainly some of the problems with treaties is that indigenous people could not read them. They didn't understand them, and they were forced into signing them at times. Sometimes people would the government would send white settlers onto Native Americans' land that they were living in, and then encourage the Native American people to sign this treaty because they weren't going to be able to get rid of the white settlers anyway. So and there was a lot of manipulation, and you'll see as you'll see in the reading, there was a lot of manipulation to get tribes to sign the treaties. The last of the treaties was signed in 1868 because, there was a discovery of gold on the land where the Nez Perce lived, and that was a treaty that, of course, the government wanted to make sure they got into place so that they could obtain the gold on that land. Congress ended treaty making in March of 1871, and then from that time until 1940, Congress decided that they would just go ahead and pass laws to deal with quote-unquote Indians. And during that time, they passed about 5,000 laws in dealing with Indians. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs at that time did not have any Native Americans as part of that department within the United States government. The Cloaking of Justice. A lot of information is packed in this article. And some things that I want to highlight from this article. We have to remember that indigenous groups are not like other minority groups. First of all, they're considered the first people. They were original to this land. They also operate on a tribal system, which other minority groups although may have close-knit family groups, they don't necessarily operate as a tribe or a nation. And then lastly, and I think this is one of the most significant things, is that indigenous groups are political. The political status of indigenous groups is something that we cannot forget. We have to remember that reservations were set up as prisoner of war camps, that indigenous people were put onto reservations by the United States government. They are wards of the United States. And although they are now considered citizens of the United States, they have not always been considered citizens of the United States. Federally recognized Indians have triple citizenship. So they are a member of a tribe, they are a member of the United States, so they have United States citizenship, and then the state that they live in, they have citizenship there as well. And it's important to remember early on that there was a reading that you had about the different assimilation and different sort of types of, I don't like the word types, but of indigenous people. So from traditional to fully assimilated. We also have to remember that not all quote unquote Indians are full-blood Indians or born on a reservation. Not all indigenous people are federally recognized. And it varies from tribe to tribe what those federal recognition criteria are. So, for example, some tribes you would have to be full blood or 3/4 blood in order to be considered of that particular nation. While other tribes might have a lower amount of quote-unquote blood lineage in order for you to be quote-unquote federally recognized as part of their tribe. And this, again, varies from nation to nation and tribe to tribe. There's also, although there's over 550 federally recognized tribes in the United States, there are many tribes that are not federally recognized for various reasons. The United States government has decided not to recognize those tribes because there's not enough people in that particular tribe for them to be recognized, or sometimes it's a tribe that is spun off of a larger group or a larger tribe. So, for example, the Lakota used to live actually in this area, in the North Carolina area, and then they moved up to the South Dakotas where they are mostly now. And some of them chose to stay with taking on other tribal names, and I believe the Catawba were originally part of the Lakota Nation. So there are a lot of different nuances with federally recognized tribes versus unrecognized tribes. Tribal courts are not subject to state or federal jurisdiction. So for federally recognized tribes that have a reservation, they have their own tribal court system, and they are free to decide how they want to deal with anybody that's committed a crime. So they don't have to, on the reservation, so they don't have to go to court in that state. The person would go to court, the tribal court. And one of the things that really kind of spoke to me reading this article is, although we have these systems in place of tribal courts and sovereignty. The be-all, end-all is that Native Americans that are federally recognized on reservations are still, they're still in black and white considered wards of the United States. And Congress has the authority to, quote, limit, modify, or eliminate powers of Indian self-government, end quote, leaving Congress with, quote, paramount power over the property of Indians, end quote. That statement says a lot about sort of that, when the rubber meets the road, Congress gets to decide what they want to do with Indians, and I'm using their language. So Congress gets to decide what they want to do with Indians, period, because they are wards of the United States. All right, the next objective, demonstrate ability to critically analyze current environmental policies and laws and articulate how environmental policies, law, and treaties impact population health today. So here I want you to revisit the 4 analytical frameworks presented by Salzman and Thompson. And I put this article under the required readings for this module as well. Think about which analytical framework are you viewing environmental issues through. As social work, we always use that framework of person and environment. It's just something that, as a generalist practitioner and even clinical practitioner, that is a foundation of social work practice, looking through the lens of person and environment. But when we're looking at environmental issues, environmental justice issues, which of the 4 frameworks are you looking through, or which do you value most, which align most with social work values? So remember the 4 analytical frameworks: environmental rights, sustainable development, utilitarianism and cost benefit, and social justice. So these are some of the highlights that I pulled out from the section on environmental rights. Environmental law often reflects a strong view that humans have a right to environmental protection. So looking through this lens, you would have a very strong value that humans have a right to environmental protection. Although environmental laws have been passed, efforts to add environmental rights within the United States Constitution have failed. Internationally, though, the United Nations states that people have a fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life in an environment of quality that permits a life of dignity and well-being. To me, that's saying in an environment of quality. So we have to think about what's the air quality, what's the water quality of that particular community, and that the community has a right to have air quality or water quality and other environmental qualities be adequate, more than adequate, permit a life of dignity and well-being, right? And then in this particular framework, it also looks at what is your belief about these rights, and are they just for human beings, or are these rights for all species? So anthropocentric would be that you have this belief that these rights are for human beings, period. And And the biocentric would be that these rights are for all species. And when I say all species, right, we have to remember indigenous knowledge is that everything is connected. So it's not just that these rights are for humans and, our dogs and cats, but that we have to go further. These rights are for humans, the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, the creepy crawlers, the spiders and the insects, the trees and the plants, everything that exists, these environmental rights are for. The next framework is the sustainable development. So when we think about sustainable development, it's about development that meets the needs of the present, so meets our current needs, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So what we do today, again, it goes back to that indigenous knowledge. Everything we do today impacts 7 generations to come. Sustainable development. Indigenous communities, of course, that's a key value for indigenous communities. We have to remember that it ties together development and environmental protection, and that development is not the same as growth. So oftentimes we think about economic development in a community. So for example, in Johnson City, downtown, this whole revitalization and lots of restaurants and bars and lots of breweries are popping up, right? And so there's this development, there's this growth. However, sustainable development does not necessarily equal growth. When you go to the link for Thunder Valley Corporation, that community is, yes, they're growing, but they're thinking about how to make their community sustainable, and that's the primary focus. So that would be a good, visiting that website is a good example of sustainable development. And then again, focus is on intergenerational equality, always remembering what I do today impacts the future generations to come. The next framework is the utilitarianism and cost-benefit framework. So in the eyes of economists, environmental problems are the result of market failures. And the goal of the law should be to correct these failures. I think about, so an example of this would be something like the pollution of cars, and then emission laws going into effect to correct that failure. Right? I also think about how vaccinations would tie into this as well. With utilitarianism and cost benefit, government places a monetary value on environmental benefits and looks at how many lives would be saved by implementing a particular law or regulation. The problem here is, how do we determine the value of a human life? And then, of course, if we're biocentric, then how do we determine the value of the lives of animals and particularly endangered species? How do we protect the life, or how do we determine the value of the life of all species? My guess, of course, is government's not really thinking about that too much. But that's just my personal opinion. Okay, and then the fourth framework is the environmental justice framework. So focus is on how the burdens of environmental harms and regulation are allocated among individuals and groups within our society. We know that vulnerable populations are more affected by environmental burdens. So, for example, highways run through low-income neighborhoods. Poor people cannot afford to buy drinking water. Exposures to and also low-income neighborhoods have more exposures to hazards such as lead paint and housing, because they can't afford to, first of all, they can't afford to get rid of it. And then you think about slumlords who aren't getting rid of it for people that are renting apartments. Focus is on, with environmental justice, the focus is both on the distribution of environmental burdens and policies, and also on the process by which environmental decisions are made in the United States. Environmental justice questions why the burdens are not equally distributed and how, if at all, the maldistribution can be corrected. So why is it that low-income neighborhoods are dealing with more environmental issues than higher-income neighborhoods? And how do we correct that? Okay, in this module, the discussion post, there's so many really great videos, and I wanted to try to limit the amount of required videos that you all needed to watch. So I thought this might be a good way of doing this while capturing, while everybody is sort of capturing the content of all the videos. So what I've done is you're assigned 2 videos to watch, and there's a list of who's assigned what videos underneath the D2L discussion post. And the one video, you will be the summarizer, and for that post, you'll watch the video, you'll summarize the video, share an outline of key informational points, use one of the 4 frameworks outlined in Salzman and Thompson, and critically analyze environmental policies and laws that were discussed, or the environmental issue that was discussed in the video, and how they impact population health today. The second video that you are assigned to watch, you will be the responder. So you'll watch the video, and then I want you to respond to the post that the summarizer posted and provide feedback about the post. So you'll provide at least one strength and one area for growth about whatever it is that summarizer wrote, how they wrote it, whatever feedback you have. And then I also want you to provide any additional thoughts and insight that you gained from the film. Perhaps you looked at the film through a different analytical framework lens than the summarizer did, and you can speak to that and the different lens that you have. The last thing that I wanted to say about this particular module is just because something is legal does not mean it is just. This is a quote that is in the video about the dance sisters that John is assigned, I believe John is assigned to watch. In the social work values and ethics class that I teach, and some of you have taken that with me, sometimes I'll have conversations with students about whether or not, they ask me whether or not I believe as a social worker if I always need to follow the law. While I believe that we need to uphold the law, I believe that the social work code of ethics, for me, takes precedence. So for example, if I know that a client, or if I go to do a home visit and a client has a bag of weed on the coffee table, I'm not going to turn them into the law, right? Even though they may be breaking the law. Another example would be a client that I worked with years ago who had been diagnosed with kleptomania. Every time she came in, she would tell me about what she stole and where she stole it from. Um, but I'm not going to turn her in for that, right? Um, so I want you to think about that statement as you watch your assigned videos. Does this quote apply? And what do you do as a social worker? My answer is that, you know, we work as social workers, we work to try to make things just. And we don't accept the law just because it is there. And this is a great little clip about law versus justice. It's only a few minutes long, so go ahead and watch that. All right, I look forward to seeing your discussion posts, and we only have one more module to go.